Hi everyone, good day. This is Dr. Von. It's been a while and I'm very excited to discuss a new topic in your hematology. So this is going to be our last topic for prelims before our prelim examination. So our discussion for today is all about your hemoglobin and iron metabolism. For this topic, my main reference book will be your Rodox. So kindly read your Rodox because this will really help you understand our topic. So now let's proceed with our topic outlines. For today, our topic outlines will be about your hemoglobin structure. So remember, we are talking about your hemoglobin synthesis and iron metabolism. So therefore, we will discuss what are the different what comprises your hemoglobin in terms of the structure. How do we make your hemoglobin, or how hemoglobin is being synthesized? Then how do we regulate the production of your hemoglobin? And when your hemoglobin is being destroyed, what will happen to the different structure or the different components of this hemoglobin? Then we will also discuss about your iron metabolism, and the most important part is the hemoglobin function. And lastly, we will discuss the different diseases correlated with your hemoglobin synthesis and your iron metabolism. So, napakarami natin ng learning objective for today. So, kindly go over with our learning objectives. Basically, we will cover all of these learning objectives. So, first, let's talk about your hemoglobin structure. So, Doc Von, what is the component of your hemoglobin? That's a very basic question. So, tingnan natin. This is now your hemoglobin. Again, when you hear the word hemoglobin, it is basically composed of two important structure, your heme structure and your globin structure. Again, kaya nga pangalan niya hemoglobin kasi it is composed of your heme and your globin. Doc Von, ano po yung heme? Yung heme is actually, this is a heme group which is composed of your iron plus your protoporphyrin 9, while your globin is the protein component of your hemoglobin. Kaya globin, this is a protein component, therefore it is composed of your amino acids. Let's take a look at this basic structure of your hemoglobin. In your hemoglobin structure, it is basically composed of your 4 heme group. Tingnan nyo ha, sa ating hemoglobin, merong heme group, 4, and there is also 4 globin groups. 4 na heme, may 4 na globin. Ito yung alpha 1, alpha 2, beta 1, beta 2. That's the globin component. Therefore ha, basic structure na ating hemoglobin, heme and globin. May 4 na heme and may 4 na globin. Doc, saan po yung iron dito? Yung iron is incorporated at the center of your heme. It is in a ferrous state. So I want you to remember that it should be in a ferrous state, not in the ferric state, because your oxygen will only bind to your ferrous state. So may heme dito, may iron dito, may iron dito, may iron dito, may iron dito. So therefore, how many iron? There are 4 iron. And remember, it should be in a ferrous state because the ferrous state of the iron is capable of binding to your oxygen, while your ferric state is not capable of binding to your oxygen. So therefore, my basic question, how many oxygen will attach to your hemoglobin structure? Ilan nga? 1, 2, 3, or 4? Of course, syempre, may 4. Kasi nga, may 4 tayong iron dito. May 4 na heme, may 4 na iron. So again, ulit-ulitan para maintindihan, hemoglobin, may heme, and may globin. Ang heme natin, nandyan yung iron and your protoporphyrin 9. Tapos, globin natin, 4 din. Sa heme natin, may ferrous state dyan. And sa iron dyan, dyan kakabit ang ating mga oxygen. So therefore, there's also 4 oxygen that will attach to your entire hemoglobin structure. Don't worry guys, ulit-ulitin natin to. This is just an overview of the total hemoglobin structure. So your hemoglobin comprises approximately 95% of the cytoplasmic contents of your RBC. Imagine that, no? Sa buong cytoplasm ng ating RBC, 95% of that is actually your hemoglobin. So the concentration of your hemoglobin within the RBC is 34 grams per DL. Remember that. That's a very high yield number, ha? Remember that always came out in the board exam. So the concentration of your hemoglobin within the RBC is approximately 34 grams per DL. And its molecular weight is approximately 64,000 Daltons. So again, ano nga ang main function ng ating hemoglobin? Very basic. Transport of your oxygen from the lungs to the tissues and transport of your carbon dioxide from the tissues to the lungs. And approximately, there is also 1.34 ml of oxygen that is bound by each gram of hemoglobin. Remember that, another high yield number. Ano yung una? 34 grams, yung concentration ng hemoglobin within the RBC is approximately 64 grams per DL. The approximately 1.34 ml of oxygen is bound by each gram of your hemoglobin. And also, another function of your hemoglobin is that it contributes to the acid-base balance by binding and releasing your hydrogen ion. And lastly, it also involves in the transport of your nitric oxide. So later on, don't you worry, we will have a separate discussion about your hemoglobin function. Ano yung tatlong function nating hemoglobin? Transport of your oxygen, transport of your carbon dioxide, and transport of your nitric oxide. Very good. But for now, ang gusto ko lang malaman natin ngayon is yung structure ng hemoglobin. Again, ulitin natin, 4 na heme, therefore may 4 na iron in ferrous state, therefore 4 ang oxygen nakakabit. Ang globin din natin, mayroong 4. Very good. That's the summary of what we discussed a while ago. Okay, let's continue. So now we have an idea of your hemoglobin. It is composed of your heme and globin. Ngayon, puntahan muna natin ang heme structure. So, i-organize natin ang discussion natin. Isa-isahin natin para mas makita natin ang buong hemoglobin. So, unahin natin ang heme structure. So, tingnan nyo, itong isang heme na ito, if igawin natin structure, nagiging ganito. So, consists of a ring of your carbon, hydrogen, and nitrogen atoms called your protoporphyrin 9. So, the entire here is your protoporphyrin 9. With a central atom of a divalent ferrous iron. So, therefore, may ferrous iron. Ano nga ang ferrous iron? Fe2+. Ang ferric is Fe3+. So, again, remember, protoporphyrin 9 plus with iron at the center. That's the basic structure of your heme. Kasi nga, consists of rings. Merong carbon. Dito, merong carbon. Merong hydrogen. Merong nitrogen. So, therefore, this is the basic structure of your heme. So, each of the 4 heme groups, bawat heme groups natin dito is positioned in a pocket of your polypeptide chain near the surface of the hemoglobin molecule. Again, the ferrous iron in each heme molecule reversibly combines with one oxygen molecule. When the ferrous ions are oxidized to a ferric state, they no longer capable of binding your oxygen. That's the basic reason why dapat nasa ferrous tayo. Later on in our disease correlation, there are certain conditions wherein nagiging ferric state ang ating iron dito sa ating heme, and that is not capable of transporting your oxygen kasi walang matatransport kasi nga walang magpabind na oxygen. So later on, i-discuss natin yan. So again, tapos na tayo sa heme structure. Nakita na natin ang heme structure. Let's proceed with your globin structure. So your globin structure, again, how many globin structure ang dapat nating makita sa isang hemoglobin molecule? May 4 din na globin structure. 4 globin chains comprising each hemoglobin molecule consist of 2 identical pairs of unlike polypeptide chains, approximately 141 to 146 amino acid each. So again, dapat 2 identical pairs of unlike polypeptide chains. Anong ibig sabihin yan? Therefore, dapat may 2 pares pero iba-iba. For example, kanina sa ating example, balikan natin, meron tayong pair alpha 1, alpha 2. They are identical. And another identical, beta 1 and beta 2. That's a basic definition of these 2 identical pairs of unlike polypeptide chains. So, nakuha, 4 yun ha. So, these are the possible hemoglobin chains na ating pwedeng makita. Meron tayong alpha, beta, gamma A, gamma G, delta, epsilon, zeta, and theta. So, kindly remember the most important one here is your alpha and your beta. So memorize the number of amino because these are high yield questions in the board exam. So alpha, 141 amino acid, beta, 146. Ito lang talaga yung dalawang gusto kong itatandaan natin. Okay? These are very high yield questions. Okay. Now, okay Doc, nakita na namin Doc. Alam na namin, very good. Meron na tayong heme structure, nakita nyo na. Alam na natin yung globin structure. Now, we will proceed now to hindi pa pala tapos, sorry. May additional pa ako. So, your globin structure, 4 globin chains comprising each hemoglobin molecules consists, again, tapos na tayo. Again, paulit-ulit tayo. Alpha and beta amino acids, 141 amino acids. Your beta, 146. And usually, your alpha and beta globins are actually seen in your adult stage. Kaya nga, kanina sa diagram natin, dito, this is actually an example of an adult hemoglobin. Kasi nga, ang globin chains niya ay alpha 1, beta 1, alpha 2, beta 2. Very good. Ang iba nating mga example, for example, yung epsilon and zeta, usually these are embryonic stages. These are only seen in your embryonic stages. So therefore, it is not seen during your adult stage or even in pediatric stage. So, kindly remember that, guys. Okay, alam. Okay, dito na. Tapos na tayo sa ating heme structure. Nakita na natin ang ating globin structure. Now, we will see the complete hemoglobin structure. So again, this is a quaternary structure of your hemoglobin, also called as your tetramer. Describes the complete hemoglobin molecule. So the complete hemoglobin molecule is actually spherical, has 4 heme groups attached to 4 polypeptide chains, and may carry up to 4 molecules of oxygen. That's it. That's actually, that's actually the summary of the things that we discussed a while ago. Gets na natin ang hemoglobin structure. Very good. Now, our topic outline is all about hemoglobin biosynthesis. Tapos na tayo sa structure, alam na natin kung anong mukha ng ating yung hemoglobin. Ngayon, ang tanong, paano ba ginagawa ang ating hemoglobin? Paano na-produce ang ating hemoglobin? Di ba, Doc, dalawang structure siya, merong heme and merong globin. Is it made separately? Of course, iba-iba paggawa ng ating heme and paggawa ng ating globin. Malalaman natin ngayon. So first, let's talk about your heme biosynthesis. Paano ba ginagawa ang ating heme? So remember that your heme biosynthesis occurs in the mitochondria and cytoplasm. So ito yung mitochondria and your cytoplasm. Doc, anong cell? Mitochondria and cytoplasm ng anong cells? Of course, in your younger generation of your red blood cells that is located in your bone marrow. So basically, these are bone marrow erythrocyte precursors beginning with your pronormoblast through the circulating polychromatic erythrocyte. This is also another board exam relevant questions they asked. At what stage of your RBC that is capable of forming now your heme? So the basic answer for that is your pronormoblast. That is the first and the earliest stage that your red blood cells is capable of forming your heme. Now, Doc, another question. The last stage that is capable of forming your heme is your polychromatic erythrocyte. The adult type or the older version of your red blood cells is not capable of forming now your heme because we will know later. Sige, unahin natin. So your hemoglobin assembly begins with your glycine and your succinyl-CoA. Remember these two raw materials that is need to form your heme ha. Unang-una, your glycine and your succinyl-CoA. So your glycine and your succinyl-CoA assembles in your mitochondria is catalyzed by your ALA synthase, forming now your aminolevulinic acid or your ALA. Tapos, pupunta siya sa cytoplasm, and then your ALA undergoes several transformation from porphobilinogen until such time that it will become your coproporphyrinogen 3, which catalyzed by your coproporphyrinogen oxidase and becomes your protoporphyrinogen 9. In the mitochondria, your protoporphyrinogen 9 is converted into protoporphyrin 9 by your protoporphyrinogen oxidase. Kindly follow me, ha? Protoporphyrinogen oxidase. And then, your ferrous iron, again ha, ano nga dapat ferrous or ferric dapat ating i-add? Of course, the ferrous. Your ferrous iron is added and is catalyzed by your ferrochelatase. So, yung iron dito, i-add sa ating protoporphyrin 9 at the center of your protoporphyrin 9 by the action of your ferrochelatase to form now your heme. That's the basic the process of how we made our heme. Again, ulit-ulitin natin. Doc, paano ba yayo, Doc? Again, ano nga ang raw materials natin? Of course, we have your glycine and your succinyl-CoA na nasa mitochondria. And then, it will be acted by your ALA synthase to form now your ALA. Then, your ALA in the cytoplasm will undergo several processes, forming now from porphobilinogen, magiging coproporphyrinogen 3. And then, it goes back to your mitochondria by the action of your coproporphyrinogen oxidase. It becomes your protoporphyrinogen 9. And this protoporphyrinogen 9, by the action of your protoporphyrinogen oxidase, becomes protoporphyrin 9. Of course, hindi yan kompleto pag walang iron. Your iron is acted or added to your protoporphyrin 9 by the enzyme ferrochelatase, forming now your heme or your heme group. That's the basic mechanism of how heme is being produced. There are certain conditions that will affect your formation of heme. In the cases of lead poisoning, no, it will inactivate your ferrochelatase as well as your ALA dehydratase. Remember that this is also a board relevant question, no? Your lead, or in a lead poisoning scenario, it will actually inhibit your ferrochelatase and your ALA dehydratase, pero more of your ferrochelatase. Remember that. So, tapos na tayo, Doc. Tapos na tayo sa heme synthesis. Ngayon, magpuproceed naman tayo sa ating globin. At hindi pa pala tayo tapos. Meron pa pala tayong additional information. Actually, this is the same with what we discussed a while ago. Pero, let's see, this is also in conjunction with your iron. So, tingnan natin. Yung iron natin, so Doc, paano ba na-incorporate yung iron? Diba? Kanina nakita natin, yung iron is na-incorporate by the help of your ferrochelatase enzyme. So, Doc, paano nakarating yung iron sa ating red blood cell? So, remember, there is a transferrin dito. Transferrin. Meron tayong transferrin, a plasma protein that carries your iron. Kaya, from the name itself, transferrin, di ba? Ferrin refers to iron, transfer. So, therefore, it's a transport mechanism of your iron. So, your transferrin, binds to your transferrin receptor of your erythroid precursor cell membrane. And transferrin with a bound iron, so may iron dito, are brought into the cell as endosome. So, papasok sila sa cell as endosome. And then, acidification of the endosome releases now your iron from the transferrin. Iron is then transported out of the endosome and going to the mitochondria. Diba? This is your mitochondria. It goes now to your mitochondria where it is reduced into ferrous state. And then, it is united again with your protoporphyrin 9 to make now your heme. That's it. Additional info lang to regarding your iron metabolism. Again, what is your ferritin? This is actually the storage form of your iron. Malalaman natin yan later with our iron metabolism. Okay, tapos na tayo sa heme, ha? Nag-gets na natin ng heme, alam na natin paano ginawa ang heme, and alam natin paano nakapasok yung iron and ma-incorporate sa ating heme. Now, let's proceed with your globin synthesis. So, sa ating globin synthesis, simple lang. Remember, we have 6 structural gene codes for 6 globin chains. Your alpha and your zeta globin genes are on the short arm of your chromosome 16. Remember that, chromosome 16, alpha and zeta. And the epsilon, gamma, delta, beta globin gene clusters is on the short arm of your chromosome 11. Also, remember that. So, paano nangyayari ating globin? Transcription of the globin genes to the messenger RNA. A messenger RNA or mRNA occurs in your nucleus, and translation of your mRNA to the globin polypeptide genes occurs on the ribosomes in your cytoplasm. So therefore, the production of your globin chains takes place in the erythroid precursors from the pronormoblast to the circulating polychromatic erythrocyte, but not in the mature erythrocyte. So again, the same ng ating hemoglobin, same ng ating heme production. Ano nga? Yung heme natin, what is the first stage of your red blood cells that is capable of forming your heme? It's your pronormoblast. What is the first stage of your RBC that is capable of globin biosynthesis? It's still the same, your pronormoblast. And basic, since this is globin and protein. Remember, globin is protein. Saan nga ginagawa ang ating protein? Basic, it's in your ribosome. That's it. Your globin are made in your ribosomes to the different transcription factor genes. That's how you make your globin. Very good. Okay, meron na tayong ginawang heme. Alam natin paano nakapasok yung iron pa sa heme natin. Tapos nakagawa na tayo ng globulin. Our next topic is all about hemoglobin assembly. Paano natin ipagpa-connect yung lahat-lahat na ating na-produce. Very basic. In the cytoplasm, yung nagawa nating heme with a certain assembles with a alpha chain and non-alpha chain, forming now a dimer. And ultimately, two dimers will join to form now your hemoglobin tetramer. So again, yung heme natin, isang heme natin, magko-combine sa isang alpha polypeptide chain, or isang heme pa rin natin magpo-form or magjo-join together with a non-alpha polypeptide chain which is made from your ribosome, and then magpo-form sila ng dimer. Ito na bang ating hemoglobin? Of course, hindi. Remember, hemoglobin is a tetramer. So another dimer, magko-combine ng isang dimer and another dimer, and magiging tetramer. Very good. Meron na tayong 4 na heme, meron tayong 4 na globins, meron tayong iron sa bawat heme, and each of that iron is capable of attaching 4 oxygen. That is how our hemoglobin assemble. That's a very basic way for me to discuss your hemoglobin synthesis. Okay, let's proceed. So let's talk about your hemoglobin ontogeny. Doc, ano po ba yung hemoglobin ontogeny? Yung hemoglobin ontogeny, it refers to the origin and development. So it's all about the origin and development. So tingnan natin. At the first stage, at the first month or of life, kung nasa sinapunan pa during your prenatal stages, the site of your blood production at first trimester is actually in their yolk sac. I believe this will be discussed it was already been discussed in your hematopoiesis, no? And then, usually at the later stage of your first trimester up to the later part of your second trimester, the site of the blood cell production is your liver and spleen. And then, at the late part of your third trimester until adulthood, the site of blood production is your bone marrow. Tapos, tingnan natin anong mga uri ng globin chain synthesis ang na-produce. Again, at the early stages of life, at the prenatal stage, ang main globin chain na na-produce is your epsilon and your zeta. And then, as times goes by, during the intrauterine life, nagbabago, nagdi-decrease ang value ng ating epsilon and zeta, and napapalitan sila ng alpha and your gamma. Your alpha and your gamma is your fetal hemoglobin. Fetal hemoglobin ito. And then, until such time that you, during birth, until infancy and you become adult, your gamma changes from beta, your gamma changes at nagiging beta. So, tingnan natin. I have a very good table for that para makita natin. Ayan. Intrauterine early embryogenesis, ang types ng hemoglobin natin is usually your Gower 1, Gower 2, and Portland. So remember ha, during early embryogenesis, the product of your yolk sac erythrocyte, ang hemoglobin, tinatawag natin na hemoglobin, ang tawag dyan is your Gower 1, Gower 2, and Portland. And then, anong mga globin chains ang compose ng ating Gower 1? It's your zeta and your epsilon. How about your Gower 2? Your Gower 2 is your alpha and your epsilon. And then your Portland is your zeta and gamma. Guys, I am very sorry, but you still have to memorize this one because this is already in preparation for your board exam. No, during the board exam, as in, lumalabas pa rin to, pinamemorize pa rin to. So we have no choice, but still you have to be familiarized on this. You know what? No, during the board exam, nalala ko pa yung ano tawag ito, yung lecturer namin sa board exam, si Sir Dinglasan. Kasi siya yung natuturo sa amin sa hematology review at that time, no. And meron siyang natatawa talaga ako sa mga mnemonics niya dito. May mnemonics siya kasi, for example, sa Portland, until now, di ba, usually, it's been how many years, no? 2013 pa yung review namin, tapos until now, naalala ko pa rin because natatawa talaga ako sa kanyang mnemonics. Yung Portland niya, ang mnemonics niya dito, remember your Portland, parang may company daw na, parang may company sa mga gumagawa ng semento, di ba? Semento is matigas. So matigas means ziga. Siga. So di ba? Parang siga ka, matigas, siga. So Portland is ziga. Zeta, gamma. Okay. Ewan, natatawa talaga ako. Parang naalala ko pa rin siya until now. So, Portland, di ba, matigas, ziga, zeta, gamma. Tapos isa pa, ito pa yung mnemonics niya, Gower 2. Ang Gower 2, di ba? 2 starts with letter T. And then, i-combine mo lang sa word na A-N-E. Di ba? Ang bantot. Tae. sorry guys sa mga kumakain dyan. Gower 2, T, AE. So, tayang mnemonics namin dyan dati. Ewan, natatawa ako. Until now, naalala ko. So, in short, effective ang kanyang mnemonics. So, Gower 2, AE, Portland, Ziga. For Gower 1, wala akong mnemonics for this one. Hindi ko malala kung anong mnemonics ni Sir dito. Z and E. So, gawa kayo ng sarili nyo. You know what, no? It's very important na gagawa kayo ng sarili nyo mnemonics kasi at the end of the day, no, during the board exam, pagdating nyo ng board exam, yun pa rin yung mga same mnemonics na ginagawa nyo, yun pa rin yung maalala ninyo. So, I prefer that you make your own mnemonics. Pero yung natatawa talaga ako sa board exam review namin. Kasi nga, until now, naalala ko pang mga mnemonics ni Sir. Next, begins in the early embryogenesis that peaks during the 3rd trimester and begins to decline just before the birth. It's your hemoglobin F. Again, anong globin chains ng ating hemoglobin F? It's your alpha 2 and gamma 2. You have to memorize it one. Pero along the way, no, ito kasing hemoglobin F, adult hemoglobin, maalala kasi yan kasi paulit-ulit yan. So, ang pinaka-importante talagang i-memorize yung for now is really yung Gower 1, Gower 2, Portland kasi nakakalimutan yan. Kasi unlike the hemoglobin F, hemoglobin 1, hemoglobin A2, mas maalala kasi siya later on kasi paulit-ulit yan. So, again, for hemoglobin F, which is the predominant hemoglobin during the early embryogenesis that peaks during 3rd trimester, the globin chain of that is alpha 2 and gamma 2. At birth, what is the predominant hemoglobin? It's your hemoglobin F. Still your hemoglobin F. Ano ang hemoglobin F? Alpha 2 and gamma 2 globin chains. And then, 10% to 40% is your adult hemoglobin or your hemoglobin A1. This is hemoglobin A1, alpha 2, beta 2. 2 years through adulthood, the major hemoglobin is your A1 or your hemoglobin A1, which is alpha 2 and beta 2. And also, there is also hemoglobin A2, which is less than 3.5%, is composed of your alpha 2 and your delta 2. And lastly, only few percentage, a little percentage of 1% to 2%, which is your hemoglobin F. Ano ang hemoglobin F? Alpha 2 and gamma 2. So again, ulitin natin ha. Remember, pag fetal, alpha, gamma. A1, alpha, beta. A2, alpha, delta. Remember that. Again, pag birth, what is the predominant hemoglobin at birth? It's your hemoglobin F. hemoglobin A1 is only 10 to 40% during birth. But during 2 years to adulthood, the predominant hemoglobin is your hemoglobin A1, which is your alpha 2 beta 2 with your little bit of your A2, alpha 2 delta 2, and lastly, your fetal hemoglobin, which is 1% to 2%, which is approximately alpha, which is composed of your globin chain, alpha 2 and gamma 2. Again, guys, wala talaga tayong choice, but ulit-ulitin natin to para mas lalong ma-memorize. Okay, next. There's also a small percentage of your hemoglobin A. Later on sa ating hemoglobin A, merong small percentage of your hemoglobin A that is glycated. Again, what portion or what kind of hemoglobin that is have a percentage of being glycated? It's your hemoglobin A. Your hemoglobin A undergoes what we term as your glycation. That is a post-translational modification formed by your non-enzymatic binding of a various sugars to globin chain amino groups over the lifespan of your RBC. The most characteristics of your glycated hemoglobin is your hemoglobin A1C. Kaya nga, later on sa clinical chemistry, ako pa rin naman magtuturo ng carbohydrates, malalaman natin yung hemoglobin A1C. Pero for now, gusto ko lang malaman nyo na there's a portion of your hemoglobin A that is being glycated. And remember that it's glycated. So therefore, we are capable of determining the value of our sugar level, the average sugar level of 2 to 3 months, because remember that the RBC has a lifespan of 2 to 3 months. Sige lang, i-discuss natin yan sa carbohydrates. Ako din naman magdi-discuss, but I want you to be familiar with your glycated hemoglobin or your hemoglobin A1C. So, hemoglobin A1C ha, hemoglobin A1C is your adult hemoglobin ang na-glykate or nag-undergo ng glycation process. Very good. Okay, let's proceed with the regulation of your hemoglobin production. Tapos na tayo sa structure, tapos na tayo paano ginawa ang hemoglobin, paano na-assemble ang hemoglobin. Now, let's talk about the regulation of your hemoglobin production. When we say regulation of your hemoglobin production, remember, hindi pwedeng gawa lang tayo ng gawa ng heme. Hindi pwedeng kuha tayo ng iron para makagawa ng heme. Hindi pwedeng gawa lang tayo gawa ng globin. Of course, it has to be regulated, meaning we have to control the production of your hemoglobin. Remember, there is only certain value or normal values of hemoglobin in the adult, in the pediatric patient, in a newborn patient. That is why your hemoglobin needs to be regulated. Check natin. So, how do we regulate our heme production? So, check natin. Same process na diniscuss natin kanina. The key rate limiting step in your heme synthesis is the initial reaction of your glycine and your succinyl-CoA to form now your ALA, catalyzed by your ALA synthase. So, meaning to say, the rate limiting enzyme is your ALA synthase. The rate limiting step is your conversion of your glycine succinyl-CoA into your ALA. So in short, this is the rate limiting step. Why do you think that this is the rate limiting step? Because ang ginawa nating heme dito, heme inhibits the transcription of your ALA synthase gene, which leads to the decrease in heme production. So in short, there is a negative feedback mechanism. Heme inhibits other enzymes in your biosynthesis pathway, including your ALA dehydratase and your PBG deaminase. So, pero primarily your ALA synthase. Ano nga yun? Yung heme natin dito, pag masyado ng marami nagagawang heme, we don't need too much heme. Therefore, heme will inhibit now your ALA synthase, your ALA dehydratase, and your PBG deaminase. So, that's how the negative feedback mechanism works. Kasi nga, masyadong marami na tayo. So, dapat pigilan na natin yung other enzymes na to make more of our heme. Very basic. How about our globin regulation? So, globin production is mainly controlled at the transcription level by a complex interaction of your DNA sequences and soluble TF that binds to your DNA or to promote or suppress transcription. So, basically in your transcription. Globin synthesis is also regulated during translation when the mRNA coding of the globin chains associate with the ribosome to produce now your polypeptides. In short, basic lang. Dalawang way to regulate your globin production through your transcription, suppression of your transcription, and during your translation. So, globin synthesis is highly regulated so that there is a balance of your production of your globin and your heme. Hindi kasi pwedeng heme lang ang ating pipigilan kasi nga, heme, okay na-stop siya because maraming heme. Tapos ang globin, still nagproduce tayo ng globin. So therefore, there should be a balance na if we regulate your heme production, we still need to also regulate your globin. Kasi nga, remember, your hemoglobin is composed of your heme and globin. Very basic. Systemic, now let's talk about the systemic regulation of your erythropoiesis. Remember, your erythropoiesis or your EPO is capable of increasing the production of your RBC. So, when there is insufficient quantity of your hemoglobin molecules that is defective in transporting oxygen, or there is tissue hypoxia that occurs, for example, in a case of anemia, there is low RBC concentration. So therefore, mayroon tayong low oxygen carrying capacity of blood. There's also decreased tissue oxygenation. What will happen? It will send signals to your kidney to increase the secretion of your EPO. Increased EPO stimulates production of your red blood cells so that there will be normal RBC concentration so that it will now address your anemia or your hypoxic condition. That is the basic mechanism or systemic regulation of your erythropoiesis. Basic lang. Kulang ka nito, so therefore, magsistimulate siya sa ating kidney na magsecrete ng ating hormone na EPO. Remember, ang EPO natin, magsistimulate ng production of more red blood cells kasi kailangan ng ating katawan, kasi ang katawan is hypoxic, kasi kulang ng oxygen sa katawan, therefore, we need to create more RBC. By that, more RBC, more oxygen that can be transported all throughout our body. That's the basic systemic regulation of your EPO. So, systemic regulation, so remember that we have a different reference value of your hemoglobin. Sa lalaki, it's approximately 14 to 18 grams per DL. Sa babae, it's around 12 to 15 grams per DL. Pero sa newborns, it's around 16.5 to 21.5. Mas marami sa lalaki compared sa babae because it has something to do with the blood volume of men. Mas maraming blood volume ang lalaki compared sa female. Dok, hindi, paano naman sa newborns? Diba, Dok, newborns, konti lang naman ang blood volume, mas mataas pa rin, mas mataas pa rin yung men and women. Bakit mas mataas ang normal hemoglobin value ng newborns? We will know later bakit kaya mas mataas ang hemoglobin concentration ng ating newborn. But the first question is, ano nga ang hemoglobin? Ano nga major hemoglobin component of sa ating newborns? It's actually your hemoglobin F. And later on, we will learn that your hemoglobin F has a high affinity to your oxygen. Instead of distributing or giving it to the tissues, it has high affinity of your oxygen. Kumbaga, parang ayaw niyang ibigay ang oxygen. So later on, malalaman natin bakit masyadong mataas ang kanyang hemoglobin. So reference interval for infants and children vary according to your age group. Individuals, take note, individuals living at high altitudes have slightly higher levels of your hemoglobin as a compensatory mechanism to provide more oxygen to the tissues in the oxygen-thin air. Diba? Mapapansin natin, yung mga taong nakatira sa mga mountainous area, they will tend to have higher value of your hemoglobin because it is a compensatory mechanism of your body to produce more, or to somehow stimulate your EPO to produce more red blood cells because nga, yung sa mga matataas na lugar, mas mababa ang oxygen concentration. So, compensatory mechanism, increase natin ang production ng ating RBC para mas maraming oxygen, mas maraming hemoglobin ang capable na mag-attract ng ating oxygen. Okay? Okay, alam na natin. Tapos na tayo sa structure, tapos na tayo paano ginawa, tapos na tayo sa paano nire-regulate ang ating hemoglobin. Now, let's talk about hemoglobin degradation. Since we are talking about hemoglobin metabolism, it's not about the synthesis of hemoglobin. It's also about the degradation of your hemoglobin. Remember, your hemoglobin will also be degraded. Dok, bakit na-degrade ang hemoglobin? So, excuse me. Our hemoglobin becomes degraded because remember, What is the normal lifespan of your RBC? It's 90 to 120 days. Namamatay ang ating RBC. So therefore, anong mangyayari sa ating hemoglobin? Mamamatay din ba ang ating hemoglobin? Remember, wala namang buhay ang ating hemoglobin. It's a structure. So therefore, it will be released sa ating RBC and madedestroy ang ating hemoglobin. So tingnan natin sa diagram na ito. Remember, your RBC becomes senescent. Diba? Alam natin, your RBC becomes senescent. It becomes aged and senescent when it reached 90 to 120 days. So therefore, it needs to be phagocytized by our macrophages. Kasi nga, ito yung mga cells na mag-i-engulf ng mga old senescent na mga cells. So Doc, bakit siya i-engulf? Remember, your RBC is already senescent or old. Does it still capable of transporting oxygen? Not anymore because it is now senescent. It becomes aged. So therefore, it has to be phagocytized. So now, aged RBC, ipaphagocytize ng ating mga macrophages. Anong nangyayari? Remember, ano nga ang main structure ng ating hemoglobin? We have your heme and your globin. Your heme, itong heme natin, heme and your globin. Remember, your globin is a protein part of the hemoglobin and it will be catalyzed by our proteases or mga different protein enzymes until such time that it becomes amino acid. Kasi nga, remember, globin is protein. Anong basic structure ng ating globin? Are amino acid. And anong nangyayari sa ating amino acid? It will be recycled and reused. How about sa ating heme? Ang ating heme, what will happen? Your iron will be liberated. Matatanggal ang ating iron and the iron will also be recycled and reused. Same with our amino acid. So walang tapon. Ang nangyayari is your porphyrin. So yung porphyrin natin will undergo several stages. Magiging biliverdin and nagiging bilirubin. So later on, when you reach your clinical chemistry, there's a very good discussion about your liver function, including your bilirubin. You will learn the physiology of how this bilirubin is being converted into different substances so that it will be taken out of the body. Remember, bilirubin is toxic inside our body. It has to be taken away or out of the body. We have your B1 and your B2. Yung B1 natin, na B1 na bilirubin, again, diba, your porphyrin will be converted into bilirubin or biliverdin. Unang-una talaga, biliverdin yan, and then magiging bilirubin. Yung bilirubin natin, meron tayong B1 and B2. Yung B1 natin, that is the non-soluble bilirubin, meaning non-water soluble. Meaning, it has to be converted into a water soluble para mapalabas sa ating katawan. It will need the organ liver because si liver yung magko-convert si bilirubin B1 into B2 para magiging water soluble. And it will undergo several steps. Actually, napakadaming steps pa yan. Pero this is the overview lang, no? And then water soluble until such time that it will be taken out of the body, magiging urobilin or urochrome. And your urobilin and urochrome is the responsible of the yellow color of your urine, while your stercobilin is responsible for the brown color of your stool. Actually, that is from your bilirubin. Again, Doc, paulit naman, Doc, please. Again, sige, ulit-ulitin natin. It's okay for me. Unang-una, your RBC becomes aged. Matanda ng ating RBC, napakasinis. So it's not capable of transporting oxygen. So therefore, it has to be engulfed by your macrophages. So what will happen? Your hemoglobin will be liberated. Meron tayong, diba? Remember, your hemoglobin is composed of your heme and your globin. Your globin is the protein part. It will be degraded until such time it becomes amino acid and it will be recycled and reused. How about sa ating heme, Doc? Sa ating heme, remember, it is composed of your protoporphyrin 9 and your iron. Your iron is liberated and will also be recycled and used. Ano natira natin? Yung protoporphyrin 9 that will be converted into your porphyrins that will be converted further into biliverdin and your bilirubin. Your bilirubin it's a toxic substance in our body. It has to be taken out of the body, and it will be undergo several processes in our liver until such time that will be goes out in the body as your urobilin, which is responsible of the yellow color of your urine, and the stercobilin, which is responsible for the brown color of your stool. That's the basic hemoglobin degradation. Pero napapansin niyo, no, yung iron natin, yung amino acid ay ginagamit pa rin natin, nare-recycle. That's the basic hemoglobin degradation process. Ayan, tapos na tayo sa hemoglobin structure, biosynthesis, production, degradation, iron metabolism naman tayo. Kasi kanina nakita natin, yung iron pala nire-recycle lang, no? Nakita natin, nare-recycle ang ating iron, nagagamit lang siya. So, i-correlate natin yung iron natin dyan. Sige. Let's talk about your iron distribution. So, your iron compartments in the normal human. So, the compartments of your iron, it could be functional, storage, or transport. So remember, your iron is transported in your transferrin in your plasma, but it's only less than 1%. But majority of your iron is a functional, meaning it is incorporated in your hemoglobin. 68% of the total body iron is located in the blood as hemoglobin, and 10% as myoglobin, and 3% as part of a enzymatic processes. And also as storage, remember the storage form of your iron could be your ferritin and your hemosiderin in your macrophages and your hepatocytes. Small amounts in all cells except your mature red blood cells, approximately 18%. Again, the storage form of your iron basically is your ferritin and your hemosiderin. The transport mechanism of your iron is in your transferrin. But again, in terms of the percent of total body iron, 68% of the total iron is in your hemoglobin, 18% as storage, and lastly, 10% in your myoglobin. Less than 1% lamang ang nasa ating plasma transferred by your transferrin. So that's the basic distribution ng ating iron sa ating katawan. So let's talk about your iron recycling. Actually, no, we already discussed this iron recycling kanina. Nakita na natin to, pero mas maganda ang visuals natin dito. So tingnan natin. First, it binds to your, so unang-una, yung iron sa ating intestine, we will be reabsorbed by our body sa ating enterocyte. So papasok ang ating iron. And then, it binds to your apotransferrin for transport to cells such as your developing red blood cells. So yung iron dito sa ating enterocyte, papasok sa ating developing RBC by the action of your transferrin. Kasi nga, sino nagtatransfer ng ating iron? Siyempre, transferrin, sa pangalan pa lang niya, transferrin. So, natatransfer ang ating iron going to the developing RBC. Then what will happen? The level of stored and circulating body iron is detected by your hepatocyte. So, tingnan naman natin ha, nakapasok ng ating iron, then magsisirculate ng ating RBC. And remember, when your RBC becomes senescent, anong nangyayari? Kakainin siya ng ating macrophage. And what will happen? Your iron becomes liberated. Diba? Kaganina, paulit-ulit. Actually guys, paulit-ulit lang ating diagram. Once na paulit-ulit, mas malala natin. So, yung iron natin will be reused by our body. So, yung iron natin, ita-transfer na naman siya ng ating transferrin, pasok sa ating hepatocyte as a storage form. Anong tawag dito? This is now your anong tawag natin? This is now your ferritin, kung storage form ng ating hepatocyte. However, we have this term, your hepcidin. What will happen? Ano po itong hepcidin na nakalagay dito, Doc? Yung hepcidin will actually cause when there is too much iron. I mean, we don't need iron. Remember, your body is capable of recycling iron. But when there's already too much of iron, meron tayong sobrang iron dito, meron tayong sobrang store na iron, what will happen? Your hepcidin will be produced by your hepatocyte. Hepcidin will inactivate the absorption and recycling of iron by acting on your enterocytes, macrophages, and your hepatocyte. Kumbaga, si hepcidin, hep, tama na, sobra ng iron. So, kumbaga, para siyang pulis. Kumbaga, para siyang traffic enforcer. Iproproduce siya ni hepatocyte, sasabihin niya, oh, ops, hindi na natin kailangan ng masyadong maraming iron. So, your iron is very regulated. Kasi nga, your body is really capable of recycling your iron. So, kumbaga, si hepcidin lamang ang magsisignal na, okay, tama na, masyado ng maraming iron. Hindi na natin kailangan mag-absorb ng iron. Hindi na natin kailangan mag-store ng iron. Pero, pag bumaba ang ating iron, bumababa din ng value ng ating hepcidin para marami tayong ma-absorb na iron and marami tayong ma-store na iron. Again, sige, ulitin natin, medyo magulo. Once your iron inside your intestine, i-absorb siya sa ating enterocyte, and then papasok siya sa ating developing RBC. Tapos, yung RBC, remember, so meron ng iron ng ating RBC. Once your RBC becomes senescent, maliliberate yung ating iron. Yung iron natin, pwede siyang i-transfer ng ating transferrin patungo sa ating hepatocyte, and it becomes a storage form now of your iron as your ferritin. Or, however, if there's already too much iron in our body, what will happen? Your hepatocyte will produce your hepcidin. Your hepcidin will cause an inactivation of the absorption of your iron or the storage of your iron because we do not need too much iron in the body if, in the case, sobrang dami na ng iron. That's how we recycle your iron. Okay, I guess, ulit-ulit lang tayo, Doc. Okay. Ulit natin mo discussion, Doc. Sige, next. For your assignment, I want you to, now I have a reading assignment for you. This is now the laboratory assessment of your body iron status. Kindly check or read on your serum iron, TIBC, percent transferrin saturation, your Prussian blue staining, and your ferritin in your raw tax. Actually, guys, this is only 2 pages. This is only a short assignment with you. Just a reading assignment. No? I want you to determine what is the purpose of these different tests. Kasi nga, parang na nabasa ako, the Prussian blue is the gold standard in determining the iron status in the body. So, kindly read on that. This is only 2 pages in the book. So, please, I might include that in your quiz. Okay? Okay, now let's proceed with, okay, this is now your hemoglobin function. Okay? Tapos na tayo sa ating structure na form na natin. Ang synthesis, nakapag-regulate na tayo. Tapos, pag na-degrade, anong nangyayari? Tapos, remember, di ba, ang iron natin, alam na natin paano na-metabolize ang iron. Now, let's talk about the hemoglobin function. Ano nga ang sabi natin kanina? Yung tatlong hemoglobin function? Oxygen transport, carbon dioxide transport, and nitric oxide transport. Very good. Now, let's talk about your hemoglobin function as an oxygen transport. So, guys, but we all know that hemoglobin will transfer oxygen. We all know that. That's the basic function of hemoglobin, to transfer oxygen, di ba? Kung meron tayong alam about hemoglobin, that's its oxygen transport. Pero hindi siya ganyan kadali. There are several factors that will affect your oxygen transport. We will know the different factors that will affect the oxygen transport mechanism, that will affect the affinity of your oxygen to your hemoglobin. This diagram is actually, or this graph is actually what we term as your oxygen dissociation curve. And I want you to listen carefully para maintindihan natin, ha? Okay? So remember, wait lang. Remember that the affinity of your hemoglobin for oxygen relates to the partial pressure of your oxygen. Ito, your partial pressure of your oxygen. Your PO2 refers to the partial pressure of your oxygen, often defined in terms of the amount of oxygen needed to saturate 50% of your hemoglobin. That is what we call now your P50 value. The relationship is described by the oxygen dissociation curve, hemoglobin, which plots the percent oxygen, percent oxygen saturation of your hemoglobin versus now your partial pressure of your oxygen. As what you can see, the curve is sigmoidal. Very sorry. Pag sinabi natin oxygen dissociation curve, the curve is sigmoidal. Remember that the curve is sigmoidal, which indicates that low hemoglobin affinity for oxygen at low oxygen tension and high affinity for oxygen at high oxygen tension. Dok, hindi kita maintindihan. Ano bang pinagsasabi mo? The terms are very technical, no? Sige lang. This is how we discuss that one. Tingnan natin yung curve. Tingnan yung kulay blue. This color blue is actually the normal curve. This is how our oxygen is being transported inside our body if we are functioning well without any other conditions. This is now your normal curve of the body. So, tingnan natin ha. So, at 40 mmHg, tingnan natin, at 40 mmHg, 75% of the hemoglobin molecule is saturated with oxygen. Tingnan natin ha. At 40 millimeter mercury or your tissue partial pressure of your oxygen, 75% is actually saturated with oxygen at a normal curve. Doc, anong ibig sabihin niyan? Meaning, 75 ang saturated, therefore, leaving 25% capable of being released to tissue. Diba? Gets? Okay. Meron tayong sa 40 millimole mercury, 75 dyan, is saturated by oxygen, leaving us a 25% that is capable of living or being released to the tissue. Tingnan natin yung right shift curve. So, shift to the right. Ito yung shift to the right. If there are certain conditions, there are a lot of certain conditions that will cause a shift to the right curve. So, dito yung red na graph. Ang red na graph nito, tingnan natin, at 40 mmHg, the hemoglobin is 50% saturated. Tingnan natin, shift to the right, it's 50% saturated, but willing to give up 50% of its oxygen to the tissue. Gets? Again, tingnan natin ha, at 40 mmHg, ang kulay red or shift to the right curve, it's actually 50% saturated. Therefore, ilan na natitira? 50% is willing to give up its oxygen. How about the green curve, Doc? The green curve at 40 mmHg, hemoglobin is approximately around 85 or 80 to 85% saturated, meaning it is capable of releasing around 12 to 15% of oxygen. So therefore, we conclude with that kind of conclusion, sino ang pinakamataas na curve na capable of releasing your oxygen? Is it the right curve or the left curve? Siyempre, your right curve. Kasi nga, kung 50% siyang saturated, meaning 50% is capable of leaving also the tissue. 50% compared to the normal curve. So therefore, the right shift curve is capable of releasing more oxygen compared to your left shift curve. Bakit kaya ganyan? We will know later. Sige na lang, explain ko na lang. Kasi nga, remember, there are certain conditions that the body becomes hypoxic. Pag ang body nagiging hypoxic, so therefore, you need to release more oxygen. Kasi nga, hypoxic na, kailangan ng oxygen ng ating katawan. So, nagkakaroon tayo ng right shift curve. Yung right shift curve na to will cause the release of more oxygen. Kasi ang patient natin hypoxic, therefore, we have to release more oxygen. That's the basic definition of a right shift curve. Again, paano natin ma-differentiate ang right shift curve to a left shift curve? Yung right shift curve will cause a lesser affinity of your hemoglobin to oxygen. Therefore, more oxygen is being released. Sa left shift curve, color green na to, there is higher affinity of your hemoglobin to your oxygen. Therefore, lesser oxygen will be released to the body. So, I'll give you an example. Alam natin sa right shift curve, pag hypoxic ang pasyente natin, kulang na oxygen. So therefore, we need more oxygen. Kaya nare-release ng mabilis ang ating oxygen. How about sa right shift curve? A very good example of that is your hemoglobin F or your fetal hemoglobin. Remember, your fetal hemoglobin as higher affinity to your oxygen. Napaka-selfish ng ating fetal hemoglobin. Napakataas ng kanyang affinity ng ating oxygen sa ating hemoglobin. Therefore, it will not release oxygen. It's not capable of releasing so many oxygen. Napaka-selfish ng ating fetal hemoglobin. That is why it will cause now a left shift curve. Okay? Very basic. That's how I want you to remember this. Sige, remember natin yung graph later on. So these are now the different factors that will affect the affinity of your hemoglobin to oxygen. Meron tayong blood temperature, blood pH, blood CO2, your 2,3-BPG, and the amount of your hemoglobin F. Of course, alam na natin to, di ba? Na-example natin to. Of course, there are still a lot of factors that will cause the affinity of your hemoglobin F, but this is the basic, what do you call this? This is the basic factors that will affect your hemoglobin affinity to oxygen. Let's talk about your blood temperature. How does it affect the affinity of your oxygen to hemoglobin? An increase in temperature will cause a shift to the right curve. Remember that ha, it will cause a shift to the right curve. Bakit? Because increasing the temperature denatures the bond between oxygen and hemoglobin. Therefore, pag mataas ang temperature, na-denature yung bond between hemoglobin and your oxygen. Therefore, it will cause a shift to the left or shift to the right. Left, guys, you try to answer because this is one way for you to determine whether you understand the concept that I'm trying to explain with you. So, try to answer ha, kahit pre-recorded video lang. Sagot lang ng sagot, okay? Hindi ko naman malalaman or maririnig yung mga sagot nyo. It's okay. You just try your best. Mataas ang temperature, therefore, nasisira or na-denature yung ating bond between your hemoglobin and oxygen. So, therefore, nare-release ang ating oxygen. Is that shift to the left or shift to the right? Of course, that is shift to the right. Remember, shift to the right, ano nangyayari sa shift to the right? You are willing to give more oxygen. There is lesser affinity of your hemoglobin to your oxygen. Your oxygen will be released. Therefore, an increase in blood temperature that will cause a denaturation between the bonding of your hemoglobin and oxygen will release your oxygen, causing now a shift to the right. That's very basic. Shift to the right. Remember that. Okay, let's continue. Oh, sorry, may langgam. Okay. How about these two factors? So, factors affecting now the affinity of hemoglobin, your blood pH. Remember these two terms, ha? Blood pH and your blood CO2, your Bohr effect and your Haldane effect. So, what is the difference between your Bohr effect, Doc, and your Haldane effect? Your Bohr effect refers now to the blood pH. Your blood CO2 refers now your Haldane effect. So, this will be explained by these two diagrams. Kaya pinagsabay na natin tong important concepts. So remember these two important concepts ha. Sige, explain natin. Yung Bohr effect, dito tandaan natin sa tissues when you're in the venous blood in a tissue area. So tingnan natin. This diagram will explain the transport and the release of your oxygen and carbon dioxide in the tissues and the lungs, from the tissues and also in the lungs. So letter A will explain now your Bohr effect. Bohr effect referring to the blood pH. Sige, malalaman natin yan. In the tissues, wait lang talaga, sorry. In the tissues, diba? Remember, sa tissue natin, carbon dioxide diffuses into your red blood cells and combines with your water. Remember, diba, sa tissue natin, of course, after having oxygen, it will also create a lot of your carbon dioxide sa ating tissue. So therefore, ang venous blood natin, yung carbon dioxide doon, papasok sa ating red blood cells. It will diffuse into red blood cells. So, tingnan natin yung diagram. And then, it will combine with your water to form now your H2CO3 or your carbonic acid. So, ano itong carbonic acid? So, this reaction actually is catalyzed by your carbonic anhydrase. Then, what will happen? Your carbonic acid will dissociate into bicarbonate and your hydrogen. Ang bicarbonate ito lalabas sa ating cell, pero to maintain electrical neutrality, papasok ang chloride. Of course, that is not our main concern here. Our main concern here is your hydrogen ion. Anong nangyayari? Yung hydrogen ion, remember your blood pH, nagiging acidic ang ating pH with the presence of your hydrogen. So, kaya nga, hydrogen. Itong hydrogen dito, anong nangyayari sa ating hydrogen? Sige, the hydrogen here will cause an increase, will cause binding to your hemoglobin, displacing now your oxygen. Again, yung hydrogen ion natin dito, i-displace niya yung oxygen. Therefore, nare-release ang ating oxygen. Nare-release si oxygen. Anong nangyayari? Nare-release si oxygen, ang ating hemoglobin, o nag-a-attach sa ating hydrogen ion, nagiging deoxygenated hemoglobin, pero yung oxygen is na-release. That is because of your Bohr effect. This is now the Bohr effect, referring to the blood pH. Because, sige, therefore, if there is many carbon dioxide, if there is many hydrogen ion, anong nangyayari? Will it cause a shift to the right or shift to the left? Sige nga, isipin natin, hydrogen ion, mas maraming hydrogen ion. Will it cause shift to the left or shift to the right? Sige, isipin natin, will it cause a shift to the left or shift to the right? Of course, nagiging shift to the right pa rin. Bakit? Kasi nga, pag masyadong maraming carbon dioxide, therefore, maraming hydrogen ion. Pag maraming hydrogen ion, maraming madidisplace na oxygen sa ating hemoglobin. And remember, your oxygen will be released. Therefore, it will cause now it lessens the affinity of your hemoglobin to the oxygen caused by your hydrogen ion. Therefore, an increase in your hydrogen ion or a decrease in pH. Remember, mas maraming hydrogen ion, mas lalong lumiliit ang ating pH, right? A pH of 1 is very acidic compared to your pH 2, 3, 4, right? So, mas mababang pH, nagiging acidic, pero mas maraming hydrogen ion, therefore, it will cause shift to the right. Bakit nga? Because nare-release ang ating oxygen. That is now your Bohr effect. That's a basic discussion of your Bohr effect. Very good. How about this another diagram? So your Haldane effect, it will actually depends no kung saan yung Haldane effect. Your Haldane effect could be a shift to the right or shift to the left depending on the location kung saan nangyayari yung Haldane effect. Meron tayong tinatawag na Haldane effect that happens in the tissue and a reverse Haldane effect that will happen in your lungs and your arterial blood. Kasi nga ano nangyayari dito? Remember sa ating lungs, you need your blood, your arterial blood needs oxygen, di ba? To replenish, it needs oxygen. Kasi nga, your lungs is very concentrated with your oxygen and your RBC will take up that oxygen. Anong nangyayari? I-take up niya yung oxygen, tapos magko-combine siya sa deoxygenated blood, and through different processes dyan, we will be able to form again your carbonic acid, and then your carbonic acid will dissociate into water and your carbon dioxide, and your carbon dioxide will be exhaled in the body. If you go back to the dissociation curve, di ba? So hindi na-release ang ating oxygen. So paano naging shift to the right siya? Of course, technically this is now shift to the left. Shift to the left kasi nga mas na-attract yung oxygen dito. However, in instances kung nasa tissue tayo, ang Haldane effect, anong nangyayari? Remember that your deoxygenated hemoglobin is more attracted to your carbon dioxide. So therefore, it will attach now to your carbon dioxide and therefore, more oxygen will be released. Diba? Makikerry siya ng oxygen. I-release niya yung oxygen kasi nga maraming carbon dioxide sa ating tissue. So therefore, pag maraming carbon dioxide sa ating tissue, ma-attract yung ating deoxygenated. Attach na yung carbon dioxide and pupunta sa lungs and ma-release through exhalation. That is also a Haldane effect. So baka mako-confuse kasi baka mako-confuse kayo kung is it whether whether shift to the left or shift to the right. So that's the basic definition of your Bohr and Haldane effect. Sige lang, we will still have another example sa ating diagram. Tingnan natin dito. So again, naintindihan natin ng blood pH ng Bohr effect and the blood CO2 of your Haldane effect. Again, the Haldane effect is a physiochemical phenomenon which describes increased capacity of blood to carry carbon dioxide under conditions of a decreased hemoglobin oxygen saturation. Remember, both Haldane and Bohr effects are the same features of the same phenomenon. So Haldane effect along with the Bohr effect facilitates the release of oxygen at the tissue level. Again para hindi tayo maguluhan, yung Bohr effect and your Haldane effect at the tissue level will cause a shift to the right curve. It will cause lesser oxygen affinity to your hemoglobin. Therefore, your oxygen will be released to our tissue at a tissue level. Kanina, ang example na to, this is a reverse Haldane effect that happens in the lungs wherein there is more affinity of your oxygen. That's it. Sige, tingnan pa natin. Haldane effect is what happens to carbon dioxide binding because of oxygen, while your Bohr effect is what happens to your oxygen binding because of your carbon dioxide and lower pH. Diba? Kasi kanina, kung maraming carbon dioxide, maraming hydrogen. Kung maraming hydrogen, maraming nare-release na oxygen. So therefore, both of these scenario will cause a shift to the right effect at a tissue level. I just want to emphasize that So more carbon dioxide binds to hemoglobin at a lower oxygen saturation. These effects facilitates the removal of your carbon dioxide from the tissues. Your bound CO2 is also released from hemoglobin when it becomes oxygenated. This is the reverse Haldane effect that facilitates the elimination of your carbon dioxide. Ito yung sinasabi kong reverse Haldane effect. A Haldane effect that happens in the lungs is what we term as a reverse Haldane effect. A Haldane effect that happens in a tissue at a tissue level because kasi nga mas marirelease ang oxygen, makambiyuhan siya ng carbon dioxide, yung carbon dioxide na mag-a-attack sa hemoglobin. So therefore, that will cause now a shift to the right effect. Again, ulit-ulitin ka talaga, Haldane effect and Bohr effect at a tissue level will cause a shift to the right effect. Very good. I hope na natindihan natin. If you're still confused at this concept, actually no, at first I was confused with the Haldane effect, no? Kasi nga, pero when I read several books pa, actually, hindi to makikita sa Rodax. Hindi na-discuss ni Rodax yung Haldane effect. However, meron siyang diagram na ganito. This is actually your Haldane effect, the reverse Haldane effect. So, sige lang, na-discuss na naman natin. Next, we have another factor, the presence of your 2,3-BPG or your 2,3-biphosphoglycerate. So, again, Doc, paano siya makaka-affect sa ating affinity of your hemoglobin to your oxygen? So remember, we have a deoxygenated hemoglobin and oxygenated hemoglobin. Natandaan lang natin deoxygenated, tense or the T state. Oxygenated, this is your relax or your R state. Okay, memorize deoxygenated, wala kang oxygen, so therefore, natitense ka. Oxygenated ka, marami kang oxygen, so therefore you are relaxed or in R state. That's how I remember that. So wala akong oxygen, of course na-tense ako. Wala akong oxygen, hindi na ako makahinga. That's just my mnemonics. So tingnan natin, in the deoxygenated state or in the tense state or T state, the hemoglobin tetramer assumes a tense or a T conformation that is stabilized by the binding of your 2,3-BPG between the globin. So therefore, pag deoxygenated, nag-a-attach yung ating 2,3-BPG. The formation of your salt bridges between the phosphate of 2,3-BPG and your positively charged groups of your globin chains further stabilizes the tetramer in the T conformation. Therefore, the binding of your 2,3-BPG shifts the oxygen dissociation curve to the right, favoring the release of your oxygen. Doc, napaka-complicated naman yun, napaka-technical yung mga definition mo. Sige, ganito na lang. As a very simple definition of this one, in the presence of a 2,3-BPG, what will happen? Oxygen will be released. That's the simple description, reason why there will be release of your oxygen. In the presence of your 2,3-BPG, your oxygen will be released. Pag wala si 2,3-BPG, therefore, your oxygen will have higher affinity. Basic, simple. Again, in the presence of 2,3-BPG, the oxygen will be released. Tingnan nyo, 2,3-BPG, wala nang oxygen dito because in the presence of 2,3-BPG, your oxygen is released. However, without the presence of your 2,3-BPG, your oxygen will have higher affinity to our heme. So therefore, an increase of your 2,3-BPG, will it cause a shift to the right or shift to the left? Right or left? Sige, sagot. Of course, shift to the right. Kasi nga, kung nandyan si 2,3-BPG, nare-release yung ating oxygen. Pag wala si ating 2,3-BPG, hindi nare-release ang ating oxygen. Your oxygen will have higher affinity to our heme. So therefore, that's it ha. Increase to 2,3-BPG, shift to the right. Now, one way for me to remember is that para lang siyang yung heme natin is yung oxygen. This is actually the mnemonics of Dr. Ian. I will still never forget. It's been a while, pero naalala ko pa rin. So I'll just share with you. Ito yung mnemonics ni Dr. Ian. Sabi niya, yung heme and oxygen is parang mag-asawa yan sila. Sila yung mag-asawa, heme and your oxygen. So therefore, partner sila, couple sila. And they are in a relaxed state. Kasi nga, mag-asawa sila. However, si 2,3-BPG is actually siya yung, kumbaga, tawag nito, siya yung third party. So therefore, pag nandun siya, pagkasama ni him ang kanyang third party, nata-tense sila. So this is now the tense state. That's how I remember relaxed and tense state. Pag nandyan si 2,3-BPG, so therefore, nata-tense yung heme and your 2,3-BPG. Kasi nga si 2,3-BPG is a third party. Kasi nga ang original partner niya is si heme and your oxygen. That's it. That's how I remember your tense and your relax. Pero meron, di ba, yung deoxygenated, tense, oxygen, relax. I hope wag natin pagbalik na rin yung deoxygenated, the tense, and oxygenated and relax. Basta remember lang natin, pag nandyan si 2,3-BPG, nare-release ang ating oxygen. And si 2,3-BPG is a third party, therefore, nati-tense. So therefore, that's your tense state. And, Doc, bakit naging deoxygenated? Kaya nga, naging deoxygenated siya kasi nare-release yung ating oxygen. That's the basic definition of your 2,3-BPG. I hope you understand. Okay, let's proceed. Now, again, sinabi na natin to, na-discuss na natin to, your hemoglobin F. Ano nga ang components ng globin ng ating hemoglobin F? Meron tayong alpha, and your 2 gammas. This is your hemoglobin F, 4 heme groups, globin chains, 2 alpha, and your 2 gamma chain. Will this cause a shift to the right or shift to the left? Kasi diniscuss na natin to. Of course, this will now cause a shift to the left. Bakit? Because your hemoglobin F has higher affinity to your oxygen. It will not cause the release of your oxygen. If magre-release man, a very amount of your oxygen. But remember, your hemoglobin F has higher affinity to your oxygen. Therefore, it will cause a shift to the left curve. So again, it has increased affinity for oxygen relative to that of your hemoglobin F. So this increased affinity for your oxygen is due to weakened ability to bind to your 2,3-BPG because your hemoglobin F will have a weakened affinity sa ating 2,3-BPG. Ano ang trabaho ng 2,3-BPG? It will now cause a release of your oxygen. Kung hindi mag-attach si ating 2,3-BPG, marirelease ba ang ating oxygen? Of course, hindi marirelease ang ating oxygen. That's the basic mechanism why your hemoglobin F will have higher affinity to our oxygen. Also, in relation to your 2,3-BPG. In fetal life, the high oxygen affinity of your hemoglobin F provides an advantage to our fetus. Remember, di ba, pag fetal, saan nanggagaling ang oxygen sa ating fetus? It comes from the mother. So therefore, in order, a high affinity of your hemoglobin F of your fetus is actually an advantage sa ating fetus. Bakit? Because it will allow more effective oxygen withdrawal coming from your maternal circulation. Again, remember, saan nanggagaling ang oxygen sa ating fetus? Nanggagaling siya sa ating mother. And remember, your hemoglobin F has higher affinity to your oxygen. It will not release oxygen because it will have more effective oxygen withdrawal from the maternal circulation. Therefore, mas gusto natin na mas mataas ang affinity ng oxygen sa hemoglobin sa ating hemoglobin F. However, this will be disadvantage on the part of the fetus too. Bakit? Because remember, it will also deliver oxygen less readily to the tissues. That is why, in order for our fetal fetus to compensate with that kind of problem, it will now create more hemoglobin, create more RBC. Therefore, nakikita natin sa ating value kanina, mas mataas ang hemoglobin value ng ating newborn. Kasi remember that the newborn has higher fetal hemoglobin because it is brought about because of compensatory mechanism producing more RBC to ensure adequate oxygenation of the tissues. Diba? At least nagigets natin ngayon why mas mataas ang value ng hemoglobin ng ating newborns compared to your adult and to adult patient. Because, as nga, it's a compensatory mechanism because your hemoglobin F has higher affinity to your oxygen. So, dapat, kailangan niya ng more hemoglobin para makarelease ng oxygen later on. Will it cause a shift to the right or shift to the left? Answer. Of course, shift to the left kasi more affinity sa ating oxygen. Very good. I hope you understand that's the basic factors of our hemoglobin to oxygen. I want you also to remember about compare the hemoglobin versus your myoglobin. So, ano yung myoglobin? Remember, same. Myoglobin. It's also composed of protein and your myo coming from your muscle. So, your myoglobin is a heme pigment of your striated muscle. It's made up of, it's made up of one polypeptide chain and one heme molecule. So, diba? Unlike sa ating hemoglobin, ilang polypeptide chain? Meron tayong 4 ng polypeptide chain and 4 na heme molecule. Unlike sa ating myoglobin, there's only one polypeptide chain and one molecule. It binds with oxygen but more tightly. In the oxygen dissociation curve, your myoglobin is hyperbolic. Diba kanina yung hemoglobin natin, it's sigmoidal. Pag myoglobin, it's hyperbolic kasi it binds to your oxygen more tightly. Tingnan nyo, yung myoglobin graph natin is towards the left. It's really towards the left of the graph. Kaya it becomes hyperbolic. So, again, your myoglobin is present in your cardiac and your skeletal muscle and is a 17,000 Dalton monomeric. Remember, your hemoglobin is tetrameric. Your myoglobin is monomeric. How many since it is monomeric, how many oxygen it is capable of transferring oxygen, or how many oxygen is capable of binding? Of course, since there's only one heme, therefore there's only one oxygen. It binds oxygen with greater affinity than hemoglobin. It is hyperbolic curve indicates that it releases oxygen only at a very low partial pressure. So, pag walang-wala na talagang oxygen, that's the time that your myoglobin will release your oxygen. So, therefore, kumbaga si myoglobin, napaka-selfish niya. Kung wala na talaga, dun pa siya magbibigay, dun pa siya mag-release ng oxygen. But is it enough oxygen? Of course not, because myoglobin is only one molecule of oxygen. So therefore, it's still not enough to transport your oxygen. Remember, your myoglobin is not as effective as hemoglobin in releasing your oxygen to the tissues at a physiologic oxygen tension. So that's the comparison. Let's compare. Again, ito yung sinabi natin kanina. 1 polypeptide, 4 polypeptide. Bound of oxygen, 1 only for oxygen dissociation curve, hyperbolic pag myoglobin, sigmoidal pag hemoglobin. Main purpose, for myoglobin, for oxygen storage, for hemoglobin, for oxygen transport. Kaning oxygen storage, only at a very low partial oxygen level, dyan pa marirelease ang ating oxygen. Where it is found in your heart and in your muscle, and your hemoglobin is in your red blood cells. Kaya nga, di ba, pag nagkaka-muscle cramps na tayo, wala na tayong source ng oxygen, that's a time that your myoglobin will release now your oxygen. But still, it is not enough. Now, again, we're done with the hemoglobin function of your oxygen transport mechanism. Now, let's proceed with the carbon dioxide transport mechanism. Actually, we already discussed this one as your Bohr effect and your Haldane effect. So, we no need to discuss or elaborate this further. Diba? Remember your hemoglobin function? Oxygen transport, carbon dioxide transport. So, we're done also with this one. Lastly, the hemoglobin function as a nitric oxide transport. Why? Third function of your hemoglobin involves the binding, inactivation, and transport of your nitric oxide. Your nitric oxide is secreted by your vascular endothelial cells and causes relaxation of your vascular smooth muscles and vasodilation. So basically, transport of your nitric oxide for vasodilation or relaxation. That's the basic mechanism of your nitric oxide transport. No need to elaborate further. So let's review. So ito na, review na natin yung hemoglobin dissociation curve. Anong mga factors na mag-a-affect ng ating shift to the right or shift to the left. Remember, shift to the right, increase unloading of oxygen from hemoglobin. Increase P50 due to increased carbon dioxide, acidosis by Bohr effect, 2,3 BPG, exercise, and your temperature. Shift to the left, increase binding of your oxygen to hemoglobin, decrease P50, and due to your fetal hemoglobin. Tingnan natin sa diagram na to. Diba? Shift to the right. Dito, shift to the right, the blue curve. This is brought about by increased carbon dioxide, increased temperature, increased 2,3 ppg, and a decrease in pH or increase of your hydrogen ion. Ako no, increase hydrogen ion. Ang tinatandaan ko lang talaga, pag shift to the right, won't hold tight. Shift to the right, won't hold tight because right, i-release ang oxygen. And right, dapat always increase. Increase PCO2, increase temperature, increase 2,3 ppg, and increase hydrogen ion. Pag-increase ang hydrogen ion, nagiging acidic. Ang acidic is lower pH para hindi tayo maguluhan. So technically, dapat increase lahat. Increase PCO2, increase temperature, increase 2,3 ppg, increase hydrogen ion, which is similar to decrease pH or acidic. Very good. Meron pa tayong example. Another mnemonics from my board exams at sa aming board exam sa PLE. Oxygen, hemoglobin dissociation curve. Kabit, do the right thing, let go. Sana lahat ng kabit, let go. Kabit, do the right thing, let go. Kasi nga, kabit, this is the different factors. Do the right thing, let go. Diba? Shift to the right, won't hold tight. You are going to let go or release the oxygen. Your kabit stands for increase carbon dioxide, acidosis, diba? Increase hydrogen ion, increase PPG, exercise, and increase temperature. Your kabit. Kabit, do the right thing, let go. Napaka-emotional naman ng mnemonics na to. So, lahat still increase ha. So, again, what is common in this one? What is common? What is this? Increase, pag-increase ang carbon dioxide, pag-increase ang acidosis, increase in BPG, increase exercise and temperature. This is common in a hypoxic patient. In a hypoxic patient, there will be increased carbon dioxide, increased acidosis. If you are exercising, it will also lead into hypoxic state. And in hypoxic state, there's also increase in temperature because as a compensatory mechanism in a hypoxic patient, you want to release more oxygen. Kaya shift to the right. That's the basic mechanism of that one. Very good. Another mnemonics to remember, Right shift, more. R, so right, more. So therefore, increase. So increase temperature, increase PCO2, increase hydrogen ion or acidosis or decrease pH, and increase 2,3 ppg. And the opposite of that is left shift, which is less. Ang akin na lang mnemonics, no, pinaka-the best mnemonics for me is this one. Pag shift to the right, won't hold tight, release oxygen, dapat lahat ng factors is increase. Increase temperature, increase PCO2, increase the 2,3 bpg, increase hydrogen ion, therefore, decrease now your hydrogen. Very good. Now, let's proceed now with your disease correlation. So, let's continue. I'm very sorry. Actually, no, pinoso konti kasi ang neighbors ko pala anong tawag ito? Nagbe-video okay sila. So, buti lang pumayag na i-pause muna kasi it's Sunday naman eh. So, again, this is already my last discussion na lang, the disease correlation. So, let's try to determine what are the different disease correlation related to your hemoglobin synthesis. So, we have this term, these hemoglobins. We have your methemoglobin, your sulfhemoglobin, and your carboxyhemoglobin. Doc, ano po itong these hemoglobins? These hemoglobins are dysfunctional hemoglobins that are unable to transport your oxygen. This includes your methemoglobin, sulfhemoglobin, carboxyhemoglobins. These hemoglobins form and may accumulate to toxic levels and after exposure to certain drugs or environmental, chemical, or gases. So therefore, these are different na mga abnormal hemoglobins that are not capable of transporting your oxygen. Sige, isa-isahin natin. We have your methemoglobin. Your methemoglobin is formed by the reversible oxidation of your heme iron to the ferric state. Again, your methemoglobin is formed by a reversible. Remember ha, reversible lamang siya. Reversible oxidation of your heme iron to its ferric state. So normally, normal oxygenation and deoxygenation of hemoglobin will really cause a formation of your methemoglobin. Meron talaga tayong na-form na methemoglobin sa ating katawan. However, it is only at a lower value, less than 1% or 1% lamang. This is because of by the help of your NADH cytochrome P5 reductase that will maintain the low normal value of your methemoglobin. Kasi nga, ano ang methemoglobin? From ferrous, nagiging ferric state. Ano nga sabi natin? Ang ferric state is not capable of binding your oxygen. So, in order to maintain a normal value of your methemoglobin of less than 1% of the body, it will be acted by your NADH cytochrome B5 reductase or your NADH methemoglobin pathway or reductase pathway that will limit its accumulation to only 1%. However, in certain conditions, we have two different types of your methemoglobinemia. We have acquired and we have inherited type. Sa ating acquired form or also term as your toxic methemoglobinemia, it occurs in an individual after exposure to your exogenous oxidants such as your nitrates, primaquins, dapsons, or your benzocaine. Ito yung mga pinaka-common ng kakos ng acquired methemoglobinemia. And also, we have an acquired type. Yung inherited type. Yung inherited type is brought about by the mutation sa ating gene for your NADH cytochrome B5 reductase. So therefore, dalawang types ng hemoglobin ha, acquired and inherited. Yung inherited natin, mutation ng ating cytochrome B5 reductase 3. And ang other term of that is your hemoglobin M, your HbM. So later on in our discussions, no, sa mga later na mga discussions pa sa hematology, you will learn about your hemoglobin M. Basically, that is just the inherited form of your methemoglobin. However, if the value of your hemoglobin is more, if your methemoglobin or the ferric form of your hemoglobin is more than 30% sa ating katawan, that's the time that there will be now different symptoms. Ano yung mga different symptoms? It could be cyanosis or bluish discoloration of the skin, kasi nga you're not able to generate or to transfer your oxygen. That's why there is already bluish discoloration of your skin. Your skin becomes cyanotic. And there's also symptoms of hypoxia. Remember, hypoxic ka na kasi nga you're not able to form now, to transfer now your oxygen. So therefore, the typical presentation, dysmic ang pasyente, headache, vertigo, or change in your mental status. So again, remember, at the level of 30%, pag 30% of the entire blood hemoglobin is methemoglobin, that's the time nagkakaroon na tayo ng symptoms. And also, what is the treatment for this, doc? The basic treatment of this is through your methylene blue. Nagbibigay tayo ng methylene blue sa ating pasyente. Through your non-pH methemoglobin reductase pathway, your ferric will now be converted back to your ferrous. Remember, your methemoglobinemia is reversible. That's your methemoglobinemia. So, with high levels of your methemoglobin, the blood takes on a chocolate brown color. So, ito yung nakikita natin sa dugo sa ating pasyente. Nagiging chocolate brown color. Remember that, ha? Pag methemoglobinemia, ang dugo nagiging chocolate brown color. Now, let's proceed with your sulfhemoglobin. So, sulfhemoglobin, it's actually formed by irreversible oxidation of your hemoglobin by drugs such as your sulfonylamides, phenacetin nitrates, and phenyl hydrazine, or exposure to sulfur chemicals in your industrial or environmental settings. So remember, kanina yung methemoglobin is reversible. So therefore, your sulfhemoglobin is irreversible. It is formed by the addition of your sulfur atom to the pyrrole ring of your heme and has a greenish pigment. Kaya nagkakaroon tayo ng bluish to greenish pigment sa ating skin or cutaneous manifestation. Your sulfhemoglobin cannot be converted back to normal hemoglobin A. So therefore, it persists for the life of the cell. So therefore, mawawala lang to kung mamamatay na ang ating red blood cells or there is already formation of your hemoglobin. So therefore, what is the proper management for this patient? Treatment consists of only prevention by avoidance of your offending agent. So, i-avoid mo yung offending agent such as your different drugs, and then you wait for several months kasi remember, this is irreversible. Mawawala lang ito if your RBC becomes senescent or aged and it becomes degraded. And what is the normal lifespan of your RBC? Approximately 90 to 120 days. So you all have to wait for 2 to 3 or even to 4 months. So therefore, it becomes now mawawala lang ito. Lastly, we have your carboxyhemoglobin. So carboxyhemoglobin, it results from the combination of your carbon monoxide. Kaya nga tinatawag natin na carboxy. Kasi nga from your carbon monoxide with your heme iron. So remember guys, the affinity of your carbon monoxide for hemoglobin is 240 times that of your oxygen. Imagine that. Madi-display si oxygen because si carbon, mas pipiliin niya si carbon monoxide kasi nga 240 times affinity than that of oxygen. It's actually a silent killer because it has an odorless, colorless gas and the victims may quickly becomes hypoxic. It gives a cherry red color which is sometimes imparted to the skin of the victim. So nagiging cherry red color. Treatment involves the removal of your patient from your carbon monoxide source and administration of your 100% oxygen. Ano nga yun kanina? Pag methemoglobin, ano yung kulay sa ating dugo? Nagiging chocolate brown. Sa ating sulfhemoglobin, nagiging there is a greenish pigment or dark blue pigment. Sa ating carboxyhemoglobin, nagkakaroon tayo ng cherry red color. Please remember those important color changes. These are very high yield concept. So, Doc, ano bang sources ng ating carboxyhemoglobin? Usually, it's an exogenous carbon monoxide that is derived from the exhaust of your automobiles, tobacco smoke, industrial pollutants such as your coal, gas, and your charcoal burning. So, exposure to your carbon monoxide may be coincidental, accidental, or even suicidal. Many deaths and even many deaths from your house fires is a result of inhaling smokes, fumes, or your carbon monoxide. Actually, no, this is very sikat sa aming time kasi a very good example of a accidental type of this carboxyhemoglobinemia is from this tragic example. I know I'm not sure if you're familiar with this story, no, yung story na a tragic incident claimed the life of the brother of Carol Banawa. I'm not sure if you still know Carol Banawa. Parang I don't know, you're still young. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Carol Banawa. She's a very famous singer at my generation. Oh, my generation, I feel so old. And what happens is that this carboxyhemoglobinemia, a tragic incident, claimed the life of Carol Banawa's brother and another family member. So the two were sleeping in a parked car which led to carbon monoxide poisoning because there is a leakage sa kanilang car, and her father was the only survivor but became paralyzed which led to his eventual death. And again, ito yung sinasabi natin na cherry red appearance of your carbon monoxide poisoning. Of course, this is not the brother, another picture ito, baka sabihin nyo, ito yung brother niya. Of course, this is another picture. This is no representation of a cherry red appearance. So that's these hemoglobinemia these hemoglobins, your methemoglobin, your soft hemoglobin, and your carboxyhemoglobin. Now, let's proceed. This is only the last group of clinical disorders na lang, your porphyrias. Diba? Di-discuss natin yung heme production natin from your succinyl-CoA glycine up to the formation of your heme. Now, we have your porphyrias. So, Doc, ano tong porphyrias? Your porphyrias is a genetic, autosomal dominant, or acquired disorders due to the abnormalities in the pathways of your heme, which results in the accumulation and increased excretion of your porphyrins or your porphyrin precursor. It could be identified as primary or your inherited type or your erythropoietic type, or secondary, which is your acquired type due to drugs or chemicals or what we term as your hepatic. So please remember that your porphyrias can be primary or secondary. Primary, which is inherited, brought about by certain mutation, or erythropoietic, or it could be secondary because it is acquired due to drugs or chemicals or what we term as your hepatic. So remember that. Again, your porphyrias is a disorder brought about in your pathway of your biosynthesis. Kumbaga, pag wala itong enzyme na to, nagkakaroon tayo ng D-ala dehydrogenase porphyria. Pag wala itong porphyrin deaminase, nagkakaroon tayo ng acute intermittent porphyria. Pag nagkaroon tayo ng uroporphyrinogen dehydrogenase synthesis or wala ito or merong enzyme defect dito, nagkakaroon tayo ng CEP. Doc, do we have to memorize this, Doc? Ang daming-dami naman na porphyrias na yan. Okay, ganito na lang. I don't require you to memorize this one, but I just want you to identify the important concept. Ito yung concept na gusto ko lang malaman nyo. The abnormalities of the enzyme of your heme synthesis, if there is accumulation of your ALA and PPG or decrease in the heme or cells in the body fluids, it will create a neuropsychiatric signs and symptoms. Again, pag may accumulation of ALA, ito yun. If there is diba, remember, nagkakaroon tayo if ever walang enzyme na D-ala dehydratase. So therefore, anong nangyayari? Therefore, dumadami ang ating ALA. Pag madami ang ating ALA, nagkakaroon tayo ng neuropsychiatric signs and symptoms. If there is accumulation of your porphyrinogens in skin and tissues, they will cause now your photosensitivity na symptoms. So therefore, you becomes sensitive to light. Pag there is a tawag ito, there is a accumulation of your porphyrinogens. Saan nagsisimula ang accumulation ng porphyrinogens? From this step up to this step. So again, anong concept ang gusto kong malaman nyo? At an earlier stages, at this stage, pag there is accumulation of your ALA, ang symptoms na very common is neuropsychiatric symptoms. Wala pa tayong photosensitive na symptoms. Pag mayroon tayong accumulation of porphyrinogens at this stage up to this stage, nagkakaroon tayo ng accumulations ng porphyrinogen, therefore nagkakaroon tayo ng photosensitivity. Therefore, type of porphyria, for example, meron tayong D-ala dehydrogenase porphyria and your acute intermittent porphyria, their common manifestation is neuropsychiatric symptoms. And the remaining type of these porphyrias, ang pinaka-common na symptoms nila is your photosensitivity. Please remember that. That's the only concept na gusto kong malaman nyo. Don't have to memorize this. For example, wala siyang uroporphyrinogen decarboxylase or merong drugs na nag-inactivate nito. So therefore, anong sakit to? That's gonna be your porphyria cutanea tarda. No, I don't want you to memorize that. It's a very, very technical on your part. Gusto ko lang yung concept lang, no? Yung dalawang porphyria na to will lead to neuropsychiatric symptoms. The remaining diseases will cause photosensitivity because of the accumulation of your porphyrinogens. That's it. Yun lang yun. Wala nang iba pa. Ayoko lang mag-memorize kayo. Pero Doc, paano tong mga steps dito? 'Di ba kanina paano tong kailangan ba naming i-memorize to? You have to, because this will help you a lot, no? This will help you a lot with other subjects pagdating niyo ng urinalysis, pagdating niyo ng clinical chemistry, you will still encounter these different steps. Yung ito. But yung mga disease correlation niya dito, do not memorize that. For my part, you don't have to memorize yung basic concepts lang. Okay? Very good. So this is now your porphyria cutanea tarda, because diba, remember, your porphyria cutanea tarda will lead to increased production of your porphyrinogens. Therefore, nagkakaroon tayo ng cutaneous manifestation or your photosensitivity. So, nagkakaroon tayo ng cutaneous manifestation. This is an example of your cutaneous manifestation of your porphyria. And these are the different diseases. Again, sabi natin, pag congenital erythropoietic porphyria, these are the different missing enzyme and these are the build-up. Kung ano yung nagbi-build ng mga products. Again, no need to memorize this one. Ang gusto ko lang talaga is tandaan nyo itong dalawang to, nagkakaroon tayo ng neuropsychiatric symptoms, and the rest of these diseases, more of a photosensitivity. That's it. For me, that's enough at your level. Pero you still have to memorize this steps para sa formation of your heme naman yun. Formation ng ating heme synthesis. Guess we exhaust everything about your hemoglobin and iron metabolism. We're already, actually that's the end of my lecture. I know it's a bit long. It's a very mataas na concept kasi meron tayong hemoglobin synthesis, iron synthesis, but you know what, I believe that we're able to cover everything. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to post at the canvas. Again do not PM me in terms of questions. Kung meron kayong questions, I want you to post it on the canvas kasi nga, that's para yung mga questions nyo makita ng iba and they will also know the answer, because some of the questions are a very good questions na hindi ko pala nasali, and para at least malaman din ng iba kung ano yung tanong na yun, to share the information with the other, I want you to post sa canvas through the content forum. Again, if you have any questions regarding my topic, post it in the content forum. You know, it's a very long topic, na-exhaust talaga natin. We will have, I'm not sure kung kailan natin ita-take ng quiz na to kasi diba, midterm na next week, prelim exam na next week. So, I will just ask a poll sa inyo if gusto nyo bang i-take ang quiz during the exam after the HEMA or during the first week na lang ng ating midterm. So, sige lang, I will ask the class representative. It's your choice, okay? So, With that ends my lecture video. Thank you, everyone. Again, if you have any question, please do not hesitate to post your questions. If you have any clarifications pa, please do not hesitate to ask me. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.